Est-ce que pour vous, c'est quelque chose d'important de raconter ça?
Oui.
Est-ce que pour vous, c'est votre manière d'en sortir d'Auschwitz? Parler, raconter,
Je
expliquer?
ne sortirai jamais d'Auschwitz. Je ne crois pas.
When I was a little girl, I always saw my grandmother's tattoo. And I thought that it was the most normal thing. I mean, I grew up hearing words like concentration camps and Mengele and ghetto and gas chambers. But even though I knew that my grandmother was an Auschwitz survivor, I kind of didn't want to hear about all of that.
Elle a passé une bonne partie de sa vie à témoigner et à retourner au camp avec des étudiants, avec des journalistes, à faire des conférences. Oui, quel était son but?
Je raconte ça aux jeunes, qu'ils comprennent enfin tout ce qui peut arriver si on adhère à des régimes comme le régime hitlérien et des autres.
À un certain moment, vous parvenez à sauver votre vie, en fait, en acceptant de devenir la traductrice de Mengele.
Pas en acceptant, on ne m'a pas demandé mon acceptation.
Qu'est-ce que c'est d'être fille d'une rescapée?
Disons que ça vous enlève une certaine liberté de vivre. Vous avez envie de faire confiance aux gens, à la vie, mais vous savez toujours que ça, c'est possible.
Le ghetto de Benjin a été entièrement clôturé fin 41.
Tout a été englouti dans une mer de haine et de feu.
J'ai vu Himmler de près. C'était un homme insignifiant.
J'étais à Auschwitz, dans ce lieu où on gazait les Juifs.
Ils avaient des mitraillettes. Ils criaient « Deutsch, Deutsch, vous êtes libre. Nous vous libérons. »
Oui, mais elle a survécu pour que tu ne le vives pas.
Et pour que toi, tu puisses vivre.
C'est une résistante. Elle a résisté.
Un Mensch, c'est quelqu'un qui est respectable, qui est tolérant.
Tous les ans, je parle d'elle à mes élèves. Tous les ans, je donne des bribes de son témoignage dans mes classes.
Il faut recommencer le travail tout le temps.
Il faut enseigner ça aux futures générations.
Ce dont on a besoin, c'est du dialogue, apprendre à se connaître.
Vous êtes grand-mère aujourd'hui, vous avez une petite fille, un petit-fils.
Oui.
Est-ce que vous voulez leur dire un message?
Nana documentary we're going to be talking about today on the radical imagination. It's a message for our times as well. Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vredos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College and Yeshiva University here in New York. One of the themes of this show has always been to present guests and viewpoints that would emphasize the need to allow suffering to speak and be heard. That will be especially true for our show today. It's the belief that we need to listen, to feel deeply, and to try to understand the disrespect, humiliation, and shame that other individuals and groups have experienced in society. It's through this necessary process of listening to the most downtrodden and hurt among us that we ironically come to know ourselves better and can begin to transform society toward one that is rooted in radical love, a love of the other, and a society where justice is what love looks like in public. It's not about shutting people in cages, solitary camps, cells, or building walls, gated communities, or ghettoizing people. It's about allowing suffering to speak and trying to understand why we often have used and exploited them as scapegoats for our own economic, political, psychological, and distorted moral gain. That helps begin the healing and repairing process that can transform the world into one that is more loving, caring, and nurturing. So we are so very happy to welcome Serena Dykman again to the Radical Imagination. She's a New York-based filmmaker and graduate of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, and her work, ranging from comedy to drama to documentary, has won numerous awards, including at the Cannes Film Festival, and has screened in countless festivals around the world. Her documentary on her grandmother, Nana, who was a Holocaust survivor, is one of the most beautiful, heartbreaking, poignant, and life-affirming works of art and film you'll ever experience. Nana is one of those life forces that lives forever. Through her radical imagination, we can learn how to build a better world than the one she experienced. So welcome, Serena, to the Radical Imagination. It's great to have you here.
Thanks
and
for having
you were
me
here
again.
a year ago,
I was,
pretty much at the
yes.
same time. So it's terrific to have you here. Explain to us again. Tell us a little more about how this documentary gets started, and it's really come a long way, right? Since
It has, yes. It's at this point, it's been almost 4 years that I've been working on it, basically full time. I started making this film when I was 22 years old. I was still in school at NYU in the film school. So I knew that I was the granddaughter of a survivor. I knew she was a very outspoken survivor. I knew she was a public person because I saw her as a kid at, book signings and on television, etc. And then when I was 11, she passed away. And for about a decade after that, I really did not think about her, or I did not think about the fact that my grandmother was an Auschwitz survivor and that I was the granddaughter of an Auschwitz survivor. I barely talked about her to my mother, and suddenly...
Did your mother didn't talk about her much to you
We
either?
really didn't, she would come up, of course, but she would come up more in a familiar way. Like I started drinking coffee when I was a teenager, and you couldn't speak to me before I had coffee in the morning, and my mom would say, "Oh, you're just like your grandmother. You can't be spoken to until you have coffee." But it was more in those little ways than in, what she had lived through and what she did with her survival. And then I found myself in Paris on the day of the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And I found myself in Brussels, which is also a city where I grew up, on the day of the first terrorist attacks at the Jewish Museum. And somehow being there, witnessing those two events and seeing the aftermath of the events really shocked me. When you read about things in the news, it's always extremely shocking, but you see them so quickly, and if they don't happen in places or to people you know and you love, it's less personal.
But you never did you identify much with your Jewishness? You weren't observant, or
I did go to a Jewish elementary school in Brussels.
Okay. Where you were born and raised?
I was born in Paris, and I grew up in Paris and Brussels.
Right.
So I'm not, I'm not practicing, but it's very much part of my culture and my heritage. And my other grandmother, who's still of this world, is also a survivor, though she doesn't speak about it. She was hidden during the war, and she lives very close to the Jewish Museum in Brussels, and kind of realizing that, she had survived all of that. She's
only to
exactly
see
and then
this happening again,
exactly,
beginning to happen.
And it shocked me enormously, and somehow it made me. So my grandmother wrote a book. She wrote a memoir at the end of her life, and I had been traveling with it for a couple of years, but I never had the courage to read it.
Traveling, so you just pack it in.
So every time I would go on a trip, I travel quite a bit.
Not ready yet.
And it just, I never kind of sat down on a plane and was like, I'm going to read about my grandmother surviving Auschwitz and about all the relatives I never knew because they were murdered. It never sounded like a fun plane ride. And right after those attacks, I decided to open it. And I read it, and I became very angry because, first of all, I had so many questions suddenly for my grandmother, and I realized it was too late to ask them. But second of all, I was angry because I realized that she was not just a survivor, but that she was really an activist, and that she dedicated her entire post-war life to publicly speaking of what she and so many people lived so that it would not be forgotten and not happen again. And we're in a time where most survivors are gone, or they're about to be.
Who were you angry at?
What
were you angry about?
I was angry at the fact, more at the fact that those survivors are not here anymore. I was angry at time, you know, just the idea that.
But the events also in the
of course, at the
museum
events and
so
at the
on.
aftermath of the events, and it was almost like, has the world not learned anything?
Right. So that led to a more deeper understanding or attempt to comprehend the larger.
Exactly. And
Holocaust.
to me, it was really a call to action to do something, because I was about to start my last semester of film school at NYU, and I realized that I was the granddaughter of this incredible woman and a filmmaker who has the ability to reach a certain amount of people through what I do. And I was like, okay, I'm making a film. That's it. And I called my mom and I was like, Mom, want to make a movie about Nana in about 3 weeks?
So this is your second year at school, or when?
This is my last year.
Your last year. So prior to that, what were you working on?
Comedies.
Comedy. Okay, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, so narrative films, mostly comedies.
Nana would have loved that too. We'll
she was very funny.
Right.
So I used to make like little light romantic comedies. Then I made a drama about immigration.
Okay.
Also fictional, but based on true events. But I had never done a documentary. I had never gone through that process. I had never done a feature.
Right.
But I kind of...
This riveted you. This was it. This just hit you, and I know
exactly.
Like you just say, you call me, I'm doing this now.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just, not that the comedies were great probably and wonderful and fun, but this was something else now.
Exactly. And to be honest, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, how I was going to do it. And
sometimes
also
that's the best way to go about it.
I didn't know, you know, if it was going to be a short documentary, a feature. I really didn't know. All I knew is that I needed to do it right there and then.
And let it take over.
And I knew that if I really thought about it too much, that I would just chicken out. And so would have my mother.
Very wise.
Because it's not an easy thing to undertake on a, you know, technical level. On a practical level, but especially on an emotional level. And I really did not give myself the freedom to think it through, because thinking it through probably would have stopped me. And so 3 weeks later, we were shooting the film in Brussels, which is where my grandmother immigrated after the war, and in Poland, which is where she grew up. And we really physically retraced her steps in Poland, and in Brussels we interviewed...
With your mother?
With my mother.
Who knew more of the history than you
She
had.
knew a lot more. She was very close to her mother. However, my mother was in a very particular position, being second generation, where she grew up, you know, from day one, hearing the most horrific stories that a child or that anyone can hear. There's a lot of trauma in the second generation. There's a lot of trauma in the following generations too, but the one from the second generation is very specific.
So you're not sure whether she really wanted to revisit this.
She didn't.
As much at first, yeah.
I think, you know, the way, because we speak about it now frequently, and she, when her mother was alive, she had trouble hearing about all of this. She still heard it, she still listened, but it was very, very hard for her. And as her mother she refused to go to Auschwitz with her. Nana would go to Auschwitz about 10 times a year for decades with students and journalists and government officials. And my mother refused to go with her because she said, I'm not strong enough. I'm not strong enough to be there.
Nana could go, but it's interesting.
Exactly. And then as Nana got older, my mother realized that it was kind of now or never. So they did go on a trip to Auschwitz together. And she, you know, became very present in the last few years of her work, even more so than she had already been. And then my grandmother passed, and, you know, my mom said that she always knew she had to do something with that heritage, being the daughter of. But she was kind of petrified and she didn't know how to. And then I kind of showed up. She didn't want to talk to me about it because she didn't want me to be traumatized like she had been. But at the same time, she knew it was her duty to pass it on. So she found herself kind of in between those two generations, stuck. What do I do? What do I say to my daughter so I can honor my mother's wish, and also the one of all of our ancestors who never got out to tell the tale.
So here at 20, 21,
22,
22,
yeah.
Wow, this hits you like a ton of bricks. And,
Yeah.
and sobers you up to a certain extent. And you want to make something that's going to honor your grandmother, but so how did that take place? What about what you wanted to present? You wanted to make this, I mean, there's how many dozens and dozens of documentaries. So what? Right. How could you? What were you thinking? What, you want to make it somewhat different, or what was your emphasis?
The first, my first goal, and again at this point I had no idea what I was doing, but the first and main goal, which is still true today, is that I wanted people to learn or to be reminded of what can happen in a world without tolerance. That was the tolerance message was really my main message, and to make people understand why the Holocaust doesn't just belong to the Jewish community, why it's a universal story, a universal message, and how each and every single one of us, whether we're descendants of survivors of any sort of trauma or whether we're lucky enough not to be, can actually take a powerful lesson out of this for our present and our future as a society and as individuals.
Crucial to understand, because all of us have somewhere in our family narratives, perhaps not the exact same experience, but of course these different experiences where we have been disrespected and shamed, humiliated, and all kinds of
exactly,
atrocious
and I think this is particularly relevant today.
Today, yes.
I mean, it's always been. It's just now it's out in the open. But so that was really my main goal.
Okay, we'll get back to that too. Some of the movements today, apart from what you're referring to. Yes.
But then how to achieve that was still very unknown to me. I wanted it to really show the transgenerational trauma. So really going from Nana to my mother to myself, seeing, there's less stories about this told from the third generation's point of view. Mm-hmm. So that was important to me, not to put myself forward in this, but because I wanted people of my generation to relate and to see that it mattered and to see why it was relevant. And I figured that the best way to do that was to showcase someone who's of that generation, because often when you have historical subjects or anything that revolves around World War II or the Holocaust, it's obviously a very serious topic. It's something that is very serious and heavy to talk about, and it still is. But I think there is a misconception for people, in their 20s or even younger, that you need to be someone who's incredibly serious and has studied their entire lives to be able to approach the subject, whereas I don't have anything against that, but I think it's important for people to see, hey, I'm 20, I have a normal life of being a 20-something-year-old in New York, but I also care about this, and it's not incompatible. So that's why I put myself in the film to show that, and to show that it was not just something that belonged in the past, that happened, that we should know about to be well-rounded human beings, but that is something that is incredibly relevant today.
And Nana helps you so much with that. We're going to see a second clip in a few minutes here, but Nana is speaking to you in that sense, right? She was a guide to how this might be.
Absolutely. I mean, I could have done this film a million different ways.
Yeah.
But the real gift I got, a personal gift and a gift for just the filmmaking aspect, is when we shot the film, I didn't know that there was a lot of archival footage that existed of her. I knew there were a couple interviews that she had shot here and there, but what happened is that I ended up receiving about 100 hours of archival footage of my grandmother giving her testimony.
Really?
And I just didn't know that existed. And so the film took a completely different direction. I spent months in a dark, windowless editing room with my editor, Corentin Swabinet, and my co-writer, David Breger, two amazing French guys. And every day we would wake up, go to that editing room, and spend an entire day with Nana. And so for me, I really discovered my grandmother this way. That's the magic of film. It's the magic of, there are things that you see on screen that you can't preserve any other way, that the paper, that the audio alone wouldn't give. But also I got to, use most of, or a lot of that footage in the film, and that really makes it. Because she was absolutely extraordinary. She was a very gifted speaker. She also related to the youth a lot. Young people adored her.
Yeah.
They would stay up with her until 3 in the morning talking to her every night when she went on those educational trips.
Let's take a look at the second
Sure.
clip and we'll get a little more of an idea of
Absolutely.
how powerful a spirit and force she was. And is.
Ils ont fait une sélection. Les femmes avec les enfants et des vieillards à droite ou à gauche, je ne sais plus. Il y avait des scènes terribles. Après, ils ont nous rasé les cheveux.
Oui.
Ils ont nous déshabillés, ils ont nous mis des locks. Ils ont nous tatoués. Et moi, j'ai compris quand on me tatue, ça veut dire que je vais rester vivant. Comme mot de bienvenue, c'était vous venez ici par la porte, mais vous sortez par la cheminée.
À un certain moment, vous parvenez à sauver votre vie, en fait, en acceptant de devenir la traductrice de Mengele.
Pas en acceptant, on ne m'a pas demandé mon acceptation.
Comment est-ce qu'elle trouve, cette femme, la force de vivre? C'est pas possible, ça. Et je dirais même de transmettre cette force à autrui. Elle sait le prix de la vie. Et elle sait la richesse de la vie.
Est-ce que vous avez une idée pourquoi Hitler a choisi les Juifs plutôt qu'une autre caractéristique pour l'extermination?
Il ne m'a pas fait de confidence.
Est-ce que pour vous, c'est quelque chose d'important de raconter ça?
Oui.
Est-ce que pour vous, c'est votre manière d'en sortir d'Auschwitz? Parler, raconter,
Je ne
expliquer?
sortirai jamais d'Auschwitz. Je ne crois pas. Je dois dire que c'était le jour le plus triste de ma vie.
Le jour de votre libération?
Oui. Il n'y a personne qui est contente que je suis revenue. Je n'ai pas où aller, je n'ai pas d'argent. Je suis dans un pays qui m'a tué toute la famille. Qu'est-ce que je vais faire et pourquoi j'ai tellement lutté?
Ma petite Serena.
Je vais l'appeler Reina.
Non, c'est pas ça.
Reina, je vais
Non, c'est Nana. Oui, c'est qui Nana? Non, Nana, c'est la grand-mère.
Et combien ils étaient par bloc?
Elle m'a dit 1000 qu'elle était la
1000
seule
là-dedans?
survivante.
Des battleurs de brasserie comme l'était Hitler, il en existe toujours, et même dans nos pays les plus démocratiques, on n'est vraiment pas à l'abri d'une mauvaise élection.
Il faut recommencer le travail tout le temps, parce que les générations passent.
Comment continuer à faire passer cette mission, vous pensez, et à cette lutte contre l'intolérance?
Il faut enseigner ça aux futures générations.
Il ne faut pas avoir peur d'expliquer ce qui s'est vraiment passé.
Ce dont on a besoin, c'est du dialogue.
Je mène une interview avec Marila Diamant-Michalowski à Bruxelles, en Belgique.
Mais où il est, Amé?
À Bruxelles.
Et Nana?
À Bruxelles.
There you are, little Serena there.
Little Serena.
Little Serena.
Yes,
and here
secrets
you are.
out. I was a brunette.
Okay. Well, it's a great color. So, how do you feel seeing this again? I know you've seen this.
Yeah, I've
hundreds,
seen it
but
thousands
yeah.
of times at this point. But I actually haven't seen it in a long time. I've been on tour with the film for about 2 years now. I very rarely, if ever, stay during the movie. but that's what most filmmakers would tell you about their staying in the room. But when I just take a step back and I realize that I'm sitting here in 2018 in Manhattan, and I have my grandmother that passed away 15 years ago on a screen, and we're talking about her. That's magic to me. I know it's not magic. I know it's 4 years of incredibly hard work, plus decades of her work, but it shows me that the world still cares, and that's the most beautiful, wonderful thing that I could hear, because that's a step in the right direction. And she, since I started making this film, the amount of people that have contacted me from all around the world, like as far as New Zealand and Australia, they're like, I knew your grandmother. And this happens to me on a weekly basis, if not on a daily basis.
Tell us, because you tour a lot. You're traveling and you're going, you're showing this, as I understand, right, to many non-Jewish audiences. So, and all kinds of, right, Alaska, I know, well, there's probably some Jews there too. But I mean, but the point is, what's the reaction? And why have you gone more to the non-Jewish community?
Well, one of the main goals making this film is not just to preach to the choir. I obviously always love showing the film to the Jewish community, and it's a personal experience for them, and it becomes a very personal experience for me, because we relate to each other and to being second or third generation survivors in a very specific and meaningful way. But that being said, I think that if we're just talking about the Holocaust to people who know about it, I'm not doing my job correctly. So I've made it a point to make sure that the film would go to people who have never heard about this, or that all they know is Germans against Jews. And
how do they react? What sort of questions?
I've been fortunate enough that the reactions are always incredibly positive and touching. That's really when I realized that my grandmother was still doing her work through a screen, but she's still, her magic, the way that because she did this work, this educational work, constantly and a lot in non-Jewish schools. And I knew it worked then, and I'm very happy to see that it's still the case today.
A lot in the audience that you go to, they haven't, especially the young, right? Young people, they haven't really fully understood all of this at all.
Exactly.
And do you also get some reactions? Did this really happen? I mean, or also perhaps some anti-Semites in the group? Oh, come on, here we go again, the whining and the complaining.
No,
you haven't felt that sort of
I'm
stuff?
surprised, and I don't want to jinx it, but I've never gotten any negative, any anti-Semitic or comments that would dismiss the fact that this happened. Then again, I'm aware that the people who find themselves in the audience of a film on the subject are probably not doubting the fact that it happened, or not, you know what I mean. This is also the reality of just touring with
and they relate
with a
it
film.
in a very personal level to their own grandmother,
exactly.
Right? Is that
That's really the wonderful thing. So we really have three main characters in the film: my grandmother, my mother, and myself.
Right.
And depending on the audience and the age range of the audience, and origin, people will relate or will take out very different aspects and themes of the film. So that's always fascinating to me. One of the most beautiful experiences I've had was about a year ago now in Colorado. I was invited to present the film. So a film festival, the Rocky Mountain Women's Film Festival, organized.
Telluride or
no, Rocky Mountain Women's Film Festival, a wonderful film festival.
What town? Just because I used to go. I was in Boulder.
It's not
up
Boulder.
In the mountains.
It's
were you up in the mountains there? You're in
not
Denver. Okay,
it'll come back to me. It's
okay,
not far from Denver.
It's pretty, okay.
But so they organized, before I got there, right? They organized a screening with about 200 at-risk youth. So those are kids that were in special school programs because of their personal lives, because of disabilities, people that
emotional
or
issues.
physical, or people
we're having
that
trouble at
exactly.
school.
And so they showed them several films, including Nana, and then they organized this event where they could meet the filmmakers and ask them questions. And those are all kids between like 13 and 17, if I'm not mistaken. And they could present us, like give us projects, whether it was a drawing or a poem or whatever it was. And I'm sitting there, and there were 7 other films they could choose from, or 6 other films. And it's an hour and 40-minute long film. It talks a lot. Most of it is in French and subtitled. And I'm thinking, this is probably a little too complicated to understand. This might be, and I wasn't there to introduce the film or anything. And about an hour and a half of this session was all questions and projects that were around Nana. And I came back home with this pile of poems and drawings and messages of all those kids. And what to them came out the strongest from the film is the ability to be able to come out of a very, very difficult situation and come out of it with clean hands and come out of it as a
whole loving person.
As a whole loving
life-affirming
person.
So suffering, speaking
exactly.
to suffering, in a sense.
Exactly,
like I said in the
and
opening.
it made so much sense because those kids were in terrible situations themselves, and they saw this example of this woman who lived through the worst time of history, and came out of it not denying what she suffered, not ignoring it, but who, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And not just stronger, but also, she was very charismatic. She was very funny. And, that's something that I've always noticed and that I've made a point to include in the film. But it's not the first thing you think that people would take out of a Holocaust movie, right?
And 13 to 17-year-old kids, too.
And so,
troubled kids.
And so that was one of the most beautiful experiences that I've lived with this film, because my grandmother, 15 years after passing, was able to inspire those kids to get out of whatever situation and to become, better people or stronger people.
In the face of the catastrophe that
Exactly.
she felt, that she experienced, and the lesser catastrophes that these kids were going through, and all of us. Now, I was talking to you before the show here, and you're invited, and you said you think you could make this, but a little plug for the event I'm going to be doing, or helping, I'm organizing, with Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, which again will be on October 30th at John Jay College, 6:45. The public is invited to this. And again, this incredibly charismatic, intelligent, funny, eloquent, articulate individual who, speaking truth to power, and is able to bridge the barriers of us all by speaking about the suffering of the civil rights movement, but making it this universal message and connecting. As he puts it within the Christian tradition, who is to stand in the breach? Your grandmother, Nanny, stood in the breach. She spoke truth to power and is still doing it. You're doing it. And however the world responds to that, we all can do that and should do that in our own way. Whether it becomes a larger political movement, a necessary political movement, in my opinion, as a sociologist, I think it's absolutely necessary. So I applaud you so much on this, and I look for you there at the event, because I think you need to reach out to all these groups that are going through enormous struggles. I was going to ask you, the Me Too movement too. How does that possibly relate to Nana's message here?
I think, again, I can't.
How do you feel about that
I
message?
can't speak to her. I think the Me Too movement is powerful, is necessary, is well overdue. I'm a young woman in the film industry, so it's something that, is particularly, unfortunately, familiar to me. my real hope, I hope that things change for everyone in every industry where this happens, which unfortunately is every industry. But I really hope that it changes the way it's perceived for the kids that are, about to enter the professional world today. To me, that's where the real difference can be made. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm 26 today. I'm from a generation where...
Today, is it?
No, a few months.
Oh,
but
okay. All right.
Today I am 26.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
It's not the exact date.
No.
Yeah.
But I do think that, I'm from a generation of women were educated, we're told that we can have the powerful leading jobs and all of that, but we were told, be careful, you might have to do some things to get there. It's your choice not to. It's going to be harder if you choose not to. So, me and a lot of women that are my age and in these industries have heard the same things.
So
but it was
yeah.
still, the
Okay.
problem to me is that it was still, we were told you're going to get those terrible proposals, you're entitled to say no, but you're going to get them. It's a given that at some point this will happen to you.
Right.
My hope is that the next generation, so people who are 10 years younger, don't even assume that it will happen, and that the boys of that generation don't think that in any world this would be okay.
But that's 10 years from now. As Nana said, she didn't have a choice here.
Right.
So within the, sexist environment that you're still battling, and the elements of patriarchy here and economic exploitation are attempting. So your generation is facing, and I understand about 10 years from now. So where does this all connect to Nana's message in terms of speaking out and organizing?
I think that's where it connects. I think it's about speaking out. It's about realizing that, I see the film to some extent as a call to action. What that action is depends completely on who the viewer is, how old they are, what world they live in, what's the current situation in their lives, the situation, on a bigger scale. The reactions I get to the film, whether I screen it in the south of France, in a Muslim majority school, or in Midtown Manhattan, or in Alaska, or in Poland, are completely different, because we, even though we still live on planet Earth, we all live in our very specific little worlds.
Right.
But it's about realizing that whoever you are, you have some type of power of making some kind of difference.
To stand in the breach. Let me just, you mentioned the Muslim community. You had the film shown it. How did that go? What happened there?
It was actually it was really the beginning of the tour. We toured with Amnesty International in the south of France, mostly in schools, so in middle schools, high schools, and universities. And France is very different than New York, or than the US. And before I went on the tour, I would just tell people I was going, and they said, it's the south of France, it's this type of school. Just be careful. Just be aware that you're gonna get some bad comments. I was like, okay, I'm ready for anything. If it happens, it happens. But still, I
You
still
showed the documentary, and
so I still
the audience
walked,
was young people again, or just mixed?
young people,
So-
schools.
High school age.
Middle school, high school,
okay.
university. So several
Okay.
screenings over the course of a week. And I still went in very happy to do the tour, but with that assumption that had been given to me of something bad will happen, because it's a group of people that belongs to that group of people. And the comments and reactions I got were so heartwarming and so positive, and I had kids crying in my arms and kids wanting to read my grandmother's book, and a lot of those kids, I think, related to Nana and related to the story because they're also part of a minority. they're also part of people that are being discriminated against and oppressed.
Within French culture.
And I felt like a complete idiot because I had walked in with a film to fight intolerance and to fight prejudice, and I had walked in a little prejudiced.
Well,
and since that day, I've made a very big point of never walking into a screening room thinking, having any kind of preconception of what the reaction might or will be. And I think this, this speaks a lot to the power of Nana and how, at the end of the day, and that's really the way we frame the film, it's a human story. Yes, she was a Jew, and yes, this all happened to her because she was Jewish, and that is incredibly important to say. But the fact is that she was a human being, just like anyone who's watching the film.
Not observant.
And not observant. But again, this is all relevant, but on a bigger scale, it's not.
It's not.
And I think people need to connect and to relate to each other. The best way to do it is, despite all our differences, is realizing that we're all human. And when you get taken away and when your entire family gets taken away, whether you're Jewish, a believer, whatever
big
it
question.
is.
Has it shown in Israel?
Yes, we're on TV in Israel, actually. Yeah.
TV meaning?
Like real TV, television.
Okay.
On Hot 8.
Hot 8.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, okay, so we'll get...
The film actually premiered in Israel on Hot 8 on two of the main TV stations
recently?
At the same time. On Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, April 13 of this past year, April 12.
And how was it received?
Well, from what I hear, I mean, it's it's television, so it's
right.
I'm not there to see people's reactions, but we got good press. So
what about the Palestinian audience?
That's something we haven't been able to do yet.
Would you like to?
Of
Would
course.
you like to?
I mean, there's no audience that I would not want to screen the film to, because that would make me a complete fraud as to what I stand for with the film. And if there is confrontation that needs to happen, then let it happen. But I think
why don't we work on this at Columbia, the Palestinian organization?
Yeah,
Rashid
that's
Khalid.
a good idea.
I've been in touch with him. Be wonderful to show it there to discuss it. That would be good. Tell us now. It's in a CD, right?
DVD. Yes.
DVD.
So we actually
tell us about
so a lot has happened since we last. Since I was last here, but we now are available on DVD.
Yeah.
It can be purchased on Amazon.
Okay.
So that's easy for everyone. We're a Prime item. And on our distributor's website, which is firstrunfeatures.com. And we're also on iTunes. So it can be rented and purchased on iTunes. That's a very easy way to see it. It's really wonderful. It's been 2 years of touring and of seeing how people react, but at some point I'm only one person, and
that's why we got to join you up with all kinds of different groups here.
But it's great
Colombian
to,
all over the place, yeah.
And it's great to be able to screen the film to 100 people there, 200 there, 500 there. But the end goal is really that it reaches as many people as possible. And we were fortunate enough to sign with a great distributor, First Run Features. They're based here in New York, and they took on the film. We did a theatrical release in the city at Cinema Village, which was, if you told that to my 22-year-old film student self that my film would be in theaters, I wouldn't have believed it. And now we're they're making the film available to most people that own a computer or a DVD player. So that's that's really wonderful. It feels I never know if the mission will be completely accomplished, but it feels like it's definitely the right right track.
Impossible question I'm going to ask. Have you, since doing this, have you come to a better understanding or some sort of understanding of how people could do this to other people? How?
No.
It remains.
It
what?
remains unsolved.
A mystery,
I don't have the answer. When Nana was asked that, she said she didn't have the answer either of how could this have happened. However, to me, what's one of the most shocking, terrifying thought when I was making the film and still today is realizing that it's within all of us, that hatred, that terror is a part of all of us, because the people who did this are, were other people's neighbors and friends and lovers and daughters and
Nana lived in a village that was 40 kilometers
away from Auschwitz.
So
yeah.
she knew what, and she was taken, was it mid-1943?
Yeah.
And so she spent a year and a half.
Yes. Well, she was in Auschwitz and then in Ravensbrück and in Malchow.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, but it was well known that this was going on.
Yes. Being, it's one of the specificities of her story is that she came from a town that was incredibly close to Auschwitz. It's less than an hour away by car.
Right.
And so she knew what was going on, or people in the region knew what was going on, unlike a lot of Jews from other countries that were just brought without any knowledge to the camps, and then that was that. But it's also one of the thousands of things that helped her survive, in the sense that because it was so close, it's the ghetto she was in is the one to the last that got liquidated. So she was on one of the last transports, which means that she ultimately spent less time in the camps, which ultimately means that she had a slighter, better chance of surviving.
Right.
But yeah, she was from this small town called Benjin, and we actually did a screening there a few months ago. We screened in a movie theater where she used to go to as a kid. Benjin is a tiny industrial town. There's about 7 Jews left there today. It used to be 30,000 Jews, 30,000 non-Jews before the war. Again, there's no Jewish community left. But we did a screening there, and again, before I went, people told me, "You're in Poland, be careful," and especially in a very tiny town. And we had a full house. We had over 100 people, which is more than what we sometimes get in New York. So that's just saying something. And we had people come up on stage and hug us and follow us to a cafe until 3 a.m. and talk to us and share their stories and their grandparents who helped someone survive and this and that. And it was a truly wonderful experience. And again, I think we need to get rid of the prejudice and fight them every best way we can, because that's really what stands in the way of us connecting, is thinking you're thinking that about me and I'm thinking that about you, when most of the time it's actually not true. It's not saying that there's no bad people out there, but
an incredible service. We just have a few, and I wanted, we're going to have you on again here, because you were just talking before the show about a new project. Tell us a little about that, because it sounds fast. I know it's a very beginning.
Yeah, it's
Tell
the very
us a little
beginning.
bit about it.
I'll just talk about it a tiny bit, because
we only have a little tiny time to
so
go.
it's a TV show. It's fiction. Okay. It's a very New York story that takes place in a nail salon. It's what I call a dramedy. So it really does mixes drama and comedy, which I think is a reflection of life. We all have our good moments and our bad moments. And it really revolves around the manicurist in a nail salon. So from China,
right?
9. There might be a 10th one coming up in episode 3.
Okay.
So it focuses around their lives, but also the lives of the customers, the clients. And one of the goal with this is to kind of break down the misconceptions that we have, or that media has around nail salons or hair salons or whatever kind of places like this, because people are always shown as caricatures on either side of the
Right.
table.
Right.
My goal is to show people as three-dimensional humans.
Yes.
With all of their flaws and problems and you know, love of superficiality too.
And breaking down the barriers of
and
people
breaking down the barriers,
we never
yeah.
think of in a way to examine what they're feeling and what they're going through, and it's remarkable. I mean, there's a great part of what Nana's about.
I
too.
think there's a connection there. You know,
a great connection.
People always ask me what's next, and I kept saying, "Oh, a comedy," because I just, you know, gave my early 20s to the Holocaust, and now I'm realizing as I'm writing it that it has a lot of points in common with Nana, just in the sense that it is about building bridges and breaking down the barriers, while not ignoring them. They're there.
Right.
And in the case of a nail salon, there's a physical table that's separating the two worlds, which I think is a very visual element. But yeah, so right now it's just in the writing stages. The title is Tips.
Tips.
Yeah,
okay.
that's all I can say for now.
Nail tips. Absolutely terrific. Our audience, please get Nana.
Thank you.
Watch
Thank
it.
you, Jim.
And we're going to go around to a lot of different groups. We're going to talk more about this. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thanks for
Really
having me
appreciate it.
again. It's really an
It's
honor.
great. We'll have you on again, too. Thank you so much again for watching The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vredos. We'll see you again next week, and we're going to go out with L'Chaim, To Life.
May you live to see 1,000 reasons to rejoice. So much as the road get hail and bless you, but as long as your health and may we live together in peace.
Ha ha ha!